Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I am your host, Kevin Noon. It is Wednesday, January 31st, the last day of January 2024. Big Me Kickoff is brought to you in part by No Naturals, and we will tell you about them here in a minute, our great partners over at No Naturals. A couple things I want to talk about on today's show. I want to talk about the lawsuit that is going on right now in regards to NIL brought forth by the state governments of Tennessee and Virginia and why it matters. Talk a little bit about transfers, and we'll see if we have any time left over at the end for anything else. We'll start a little bit on this before we get into our sponsor break, but just so you know, on Tuesday, the NCAA came after Tennessee with more major violations in terms of NIL. And immediately after that, the chancellor, I believe it's chancellor, I don't remember which schools are chancellor and which schools are presidents and whatnot, but the chancellor of Tennessee came out with some scathing remarks. And it was followed up today by the two states I mentioned before, Tennessee and Virginia, going to federal court against the NCAA, basically saying that these rules that are in place are violate the Sherman Act, antitrust laws, the enforcement of NIL rules. Now, I'm not an attorney, nor did I sleep at Holiday Inn Express last night. So I don't necessarily know all the finer points of this. I'm not going to say that I am one of the people that are out on the forefront of NIL rules and enforcement. There are some people who do a very good job of following it, but the NIL in general is a constantly evolving organism. And I don't think anybody can get their arms around it, because you sit there and you do get your arms around it and it changes and it moves, and it's a slippery little bugger, and you're just not going to be able to keep your arms around it. So, I will get into a little bit more of that here on the other side of this, but I want to tell you about No Naturals. I don't have my sheet on me, but I have it here in a Word doc. So, here we go. Are you ready for an entirely different edible experience? Welcome to No Naturals, where we're shattering the stereotype of one-note, slow-acting gummies. Forget waiting over an hour to feel all the effects. Our gummies are like a sprinter out of the blocks, fast-acting in just 15 to 30 minutes. Picture this. You're not just choosing a flavor, you're choosing your vibe. With 5 core experiences and 6 custom combos, you're in full control. Whether it's energy and focus without the crash, a peaceful slumber that lasts all night, or a game-changing burst of bliss and euphoria, these edibles are the real deal. And the best part, you don't need a doctor's recommendation. No Natural gummies are dispensary quality and discreetly delivered right to your door. So whether you're craving a productivity boost, a good night's sleep, or some blissful euphoria, say hello to No Naturals. Try them today and use code HUDDLE10 for 10% off your order at shop.nonaturals.com. Know your edibles, know your experience, No Naturals. And if you missed any of my read right there, you can see it down here in the scroll below. Use that code HUDDLE10. Not only do you get 10% off of your deal, but it also helps us here at Buckeye Huddle and at the Big Me Kickoff, so they know how effective this ad is. And of course, all the notes will be down in the show notes, whether or not you're watching us on YouTube or listening on one of your favorite podcasting channels. But nonaturals.com is the place to go. And we've had a lot of great feedback over at Buckeye Huddle on the Huddle board since the sponsorship came in place. They are also a sponsor of the Huddle message board. Very exciting stuff. All right, now back to business. So really my understanding of this whole case is they're trying to say that you cannot talk about NIL in advance as a recruitable athlete, whether or not you are a high school athlete, whether or not you are in the portal looking to land somewhere else. You're not supposed to be able to talk about NIL deals. And let me clarify this too. it's not that the schools are talking about the NIL deals, but the collectives. And in a lot of ways, this is not so much they're going the NC2A is going after the schools because they really can't go after the collectives themselves. And since the collectives are affiliated loosely to the schools in some way, shape, or form, but are not agents of the school, it's kind of how it all works out. So you look at Tennessee and its quarterback, Nico, and I'm horrible at pronouncing that last name, so I'm going to do him a solid and not try and pronounce it right now. I don't cover Tennessee. Took me long enough to get JT Tuimoloau down pat, so I'm not going to mess that name up. Pretty disrespectful to screw up somebody's name. But Nico was there was a lot of talk about the deal that was put in place there and that it was sizable. You look at Florida, who has also been tapped by the NC2A, and its recruitment of Jaden Rashada. And the rub of that whole thing is that Florida is now in trouble. Rashada didn't even go to Florida. Ended up going out west to Arizona State. I think he portaled again. I can't keep track of everybody. But why should this concern you? I think every school, to a certain extent, has to be able to answer the question of what might an NIL deal look like. And again, I'm interchanging the word school with collective and how they are linked or not linked. So don't micro analyze every word I say and say, well, Noon said this and Noon said that. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I took journalism law in college twice because I loved it so much. I had to take it again. Actually, I stopped going the first time and failed and went back again and took it like a year later, a little more mature, got a B plus in it. So that's about the extent of my legal training outside of maybe watching LA Law as a kid. Or Night Court. Probably like Night Court better. Actually, I know I liked Night Court better. But I think the states are trying to get either a temporary restraining order or an injunction saying that these rules should not apply. These rules that are constantly changing and were just slapped out there so quickly because honestly, the NC2A knew and the states knew that if they didn't get rules out there, it's better to play the ball than to let the ball play you. And the ball was about to play the NC2A and everything else. And the NC2A royally screwed this up by letting it go as long as it did without getting something in place. The NC2A and its membership, which are all your favorite colleges and universities, didn't want to share the pie. And instead of sharing it in a responsible, well thought out way to where they could have had a year to ramp up a deal and get it out there properly, all these states acting on their own, Ohio as well. And I remember when Ohio got its NIL press conference over at the Covelli Center. And, credit to Ohio lawmakers for getting out ahead of it because not having an NIL rules package in place only puts you behind the eight ball even more. You need to have some sort of rules, but we don't have uniform rules. But they're trying to saying that you cannot have these types of conversations with athletes, and basically you don't have a level playing field. And I agree. And again, the reality is that if just because they're going after Tennessee and Florida and these schools that maybe in Ohio State's universe are viewed as schools that have played fast and loose with rules in the past. And I'm sure in their universes, they feel that Ohio State is the same, has played, with rules fast and loose. And, I'm sure that everybody feels that way about USC. But if they come after this school or that school, what's to say they're not going to come after your favorite school or your favorite school? So it's difficult to see how the NC2A is going to win this, how they're going to explain why this is not antitrust, why this is there, because you can't sit there and say well, it makes an unequal playing field. Here in the last couple years of NIL, the playing field has been more equal, not less equal. Pre-NIL, we were dealing with a much smaller set of schools that were winning on the regular. NIL allows more programs to go out there and potentially get guys through the portal, or even just through straight recruiting. Somebody that maybe in the past would have just said, I'm going to go to Ohio State or Alabama or USC, and they go somewhere else. They go to UCLA. I mean, I'm just throwing school names out here. So again, don't read in everything I'm saying. UCLA or Texas Tech or Auburn or Minnesota. It allows those schools to come up. And because you end up start getting those athletes, maybe more athletes stay in their home area, and it builds, and I think it brings the sport up in general. Now, as fans of one of the most successful programs, certainly here in recent memory in terms of just straight wins, maybe you don't want to see a ton of parity. It's good to be the king. It's good to be the king. And have Ohio State be one of 6 schools or whatever that really get everybody and do everything. But that's just not where we are. And the NC2A has already had a ruling kind of slapped down. And to the NC2A's credit, it saw that it was going to get slapped down, and they're like, well, we're not going to fight this one. And that was for the second transfer. They wanted to make it to where everybody gets one transfer, but in that second transfer, you got to get a waiver, or you're going to have to sit a year or whatever. And that got, that sniffed a courtroom, and a TRO, temporary restraining order, was put in place. And the NC2A is like, well, we're not going to really fight this one. If the NC2A fights this and loses, as I would expect it to do, is that the end of the NC2A? Do you just blow the whole thing up? Do you start a new organization? Remember, it's again, the NC2A is a product of the colleges and universities. It's not a chicken and egg situation of where the NC2A was around first, and then these colleges and universities started popping up like so many McDonald's franchises. No, this is an organization that they are all part of, and because they've come together under this banner was created. And if it gets to such a role of where the NC2A cannot effectively manage these universities, when it's these universities that have empowered the NC2A in the first place, when is the vote of no confidence? When do you blow it up? Or at least when do you see a major movement from your major schools on the athletic front? Because remember, the NC2A has nothing to do with the academic side in terms of research and, like what the Big Ten Alliance is and what schools' endowments are. That is all handled on the school level. None of that. You don't get a different seat at the table at the NC2A based on that type of stuff. This is purely athletics. So we're very much at a watershed moment in terms of what sports are going to look like. And as I've mentioned, that if it can happen here and it can happen there and it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. Ohio State could get something at some point, because we're not necessarily getting a lot of details about exactly what all these charges are or whatever. But Ohio State has gone out and gotten 6 whole players out of the portal, and people are convinced that Ohio State is doing this, that, and the other wrong. I mean, a lot of that ends up coming out of petty jealousy and things of that nature. Ohio State fans last year certainly were unhappy that Michigan once again cleaned up on the offensive line in the transfer portal. It's it's an endless cycle. It's just how it's going to work on all of that. But what does this all mean? And I can assure you that a tale of two ADs at Ohio State are watching this in very different ways. Ross Bjork, the incoming AD, who actually starts in a capacity March 1st as an advisor and then takes over the full job July 1st, is watching this curiously as he still has 20 years of his career left. I mean, I'm not saying all 20 are going to be at Ohio State. I'm not saying he's going to go until I think he's a year or two younger than me. I think he's about 50. So I'm not saying he's necessarily going to go to 70. And then you have Gene Smith watching it. It's like, oh, thank God I'm getting out of Dodge. Because just think about how much things have changed over Gene Smith's long and illustrious career. I mean, holy hell. He's riding off into the mountains really at a great time. And I'm sure that there might be part of him is like, oh man, I wish I could run it back one more year. One more year, this 24 team for Ohio State football could be pretty damn good. Oh, but there's this 900-pound monster in the corner of the room called NIL and the NC2A and this lawsuit. I mean, it's going to be crazy. And I think that we're going to see other states enjoying themselves on this lawsuit. I think it's going to be more than Tennessee and Virginia by the time it's all said and done. And we will keep a track of it here on the Big Me Kickoff. Again, I don't have all the finer details. I read a couple of articles. I watched a couple of videos. I wanted to kind of see what other people were thinking on this. Largely, everybody just really, just validated everything that I had felt on it. Some people brought up some interesting points. I've mentioned one or two of them. I didn't mention others. I'm not somebody who goes and reads what other people write and then try and pass that stuff off as my own. I hate that kind of stuff. But I needed to watch what some other people were saying, people who follow the NIL a lot closer than I do, just to make sure I had some validation on my thoughts. So I would not be leading my viewers and listeners astray. We'll talk briefly about transfers just because we've done some shows. I was on Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning with Tom Orr. Technically this morning's show, but we recorded it last evening. And just by the way that things work, we run the show a little bit early just because it works better. I was very impressed with the crew. I had a chance to spend at least a moment at all 5 tables. I was really more focused on 2 of them just based on which camera I had where. You can check out all that stuff on BuckeyeHuddle.com or YouTube.com at Buckeye Huddle. Spit it out, dummy. All the videos in full. Yes, I know you can't hear the questions. I have 3 sets of gear. They were all spread out to their max. I did not have enough additional mics to be able to get things pointing back to the crowd. We will not have 3 tables at a time all the time, especially in a high leverage situation. We're doing our best. If anybody wants to send me $2,000 for another mic kit, reach out to me and I'll tell you how to do it better than a super chat. So all the money can go directly to the site and then in turn fund a additional microphone set for me. I was most interested in Quinshon Judkins, not so much as I think that he's the most impactful player based on what is around him. I think that he and Trevion Henderson and Dallin Hayden are going to probably have the best running back room in football. But, Will Howard obviously steps into a quarterback battle. Seth McLaughlin steps into a starting role on the offensive line. Caleb Downs steps probably into a starting role. But I wanted to hear from Quinshon Judkins because there was a lot of noise coming out of Oxford and Ole Miss Nation and SEC Nation that Judkins was a bad apple and Ole Miss basically helped pack his bags and sent him on his way, drove him to the Greyhound station and said, get out, you're terrible. I know that you can't necessarily make your full opinion of somebody from one interview, but he was fantastic to talk to. And he was asked about that in much, not as direct of a way, and certainly much more massaged about a post season sit down with Lane Kiffin and his usage, and he's like, no, that's just rumor. Don't, no. Probably never going to know the full extent of things. I certainly have had people who've reached out to me and been like, they've said their things. Can't confirm any of it. So I'm not going to repeat it because that's not fair to anybody. But I think, I thought he really gets it. He's happy. He's excited to be in a system where he's going to be sharing the carries or sharing with Trevion Henderson. He knows that he doesn't need 30 carries a game. I think if you look at his stats from Ole Miss, he was probably overused in some games. His numbers were down from year 1 to year 2. I mean, his amount of carries weren't dramatically different, but there's something to be said about the carries start to add on and add on and add on, and you lose a little bit of the tread, and you can regain some of that tread from season to season. And then there's some that just is burnt off the tire and you just can't do anything about it. And I think we're going to see the yards per carry go back up on Quinshon this year, as he will be used more, more conservatively. Now, if he comes out against Akron and is ripping off 8 yards a run, you ride the hot hand. Not to the point of, if he's getting 8 yards a carry, you're probably not going to have to play him a whole game, but you're going to want to ride the hot hand. So there are going to be games where he may get 21 carries. There may be games where he gets 12 carries. Excited to see that. I'm going to talk about a player that probably doesn't get talked about in this transfer group. Of the 5 that we got, we did not get to talk to Julian Sayin. Hopefully we get him later in this winter conditioning period. Got to talk to Will Kasmerick, the tight end who transferred in from Ohio University. Short trip up US 33 to Columbus. Just about how excited his teammates were for him. Obviously, you don't want to lose a good teammate. And I'm certainly not saying, I don't want to be the guy who's like, well, the MAC, just a group of 5 conference. I love watching MAC, and I enjoy following MAC football. Didn't really cover it, from an enjoyment standpoint as much this last year as I have in previous years. It's just a weird year for me. Just couldn't really buy in on it. But they're excited because they know that he's getting the opportunity to play. We so often talk about the next level being the NFL, but he's playing at Ohio State, that behemoth an hour and 15 minutes north. And, so there's a lot of excitement there. I think fans will be excited that he loves blocking, quote unquote. I love blocking. And he should just start making merch with that. I think a lot of people would buy it. It would be a very nice NIL opportunity for him. Will Kasmerick, I love blocking. I'm just saying, and I'm not even asking for a little bit of a fee on the front for coming up with this campaign. But if anybody's watching and does create that, keep me in mind. Caleb Downs is Caleb Downs. I mean, super fantastic kid. We had a chance to talk to him a couple years ago on Southern Swing. Probably coming out of that interview, I thought he was going to go to Ohio State. Talking to him then, obviously the departure of Nick Saban, or Nick Saban being at Alabama was probably what put Alabama over the top. Nick Saban not being at Alabama is what moved him to leave. And everybody thought it was going to be UGA. Well, it's not. I've talked about a lot of these points. I don't want to kind of repeat the same things I've said on other shows as we're closing in on 25 minutes on this edition. So I'm excited with that. I'm excited about all of the transfers. They all seem like good kids. When I'm 52, they're all kids to me. We will probably get some more interviews next week. We have National Signing Day, the original version, the February version. Ohio State will only be signing one player, Dominic Kirks, defensive lineman out of Painesville, Ohio. Maybe we get Ryan Day, maybe we don't. There's a belief that we won't get Ryan until he fills out that last spot on his coaching staff. No, I've not heard anything lately. I mean, certainly the Jason Taylor name had been thrown around out there. Obviously, James Laurinaitis moving up to a full role has been thrown out there. I can assure you, when I have something to report on it, I'm not going to be shy about it. I'm going to come out and report it. So don't just assume because we're not hearing anything that this is dead or that's dead. There's just nothing to report at this point. And while I do try to go 3 days a week, that's my deal now. I'm not going to try and force a conversation on something that doesn't exist. But that's kind of what I got right now at this point. As I've said, it's Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. Join me on Friday. I guess that is Friday, February 2nd. The plan is to go live. I've said 2 tape, 1 live is my usual week. So the plan is to go live. But when is that going to happen? I haven't decided for sure. Hit that bell. Subscribe to the channel. Don't miss a single episode of the Big Me Kickoff, presented in part by No Naturals. But I will let you know on there. I'll try and make a decision on Thursday of what I'm going to do. But until then, have a great day, and I will talk to you all very soon.